Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday night. Thank you for tuning in again for another round of our Sunday Q&As. We are so fortunate tonight to be joined by Councilwoman Andria McClellan from Norfolk, who is running for Lieutenant Governor. Andria, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great. It's good to be with you and the folks in the Charlottesville, Albemarle County area, and I guess all around the state or the country with Zoom, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have folks tuning in from very near and afar. I know that you are a proud UVA alum, and so you've called Charlottesville home before. I'm sure that there are some people watching who already have the good fortune to know you. I know that you and I have just started to get to know each other as you've hit the trail statewide, but have already found a kindred spirit in you as someone who's very serious about serious policy and delivering real results. So I am very excited for us to have a chance to talk tonight, and for all of the folks who are watching, especially here in the Charlottesville community, to have a chance to get to know you as well. Just for folks who might be tuning in for the first time, to help you get acquainted to the setup here, there are two places that you can watch us on, both YouTube and Facebook. And for both of them, there's a chat. So please feel free to drop questions as we go. We will be keeping an eye on that to make sure that we're talking about the things that you're most excited to talk about tonight. We'll start by teeing up with a few questions that I had in mind, so that you can start to get to know Andria. But I'm very excited to have us let this conversation go wherever it is that you want to. Real quickly, because we are sort of at an interesting spot in the calendar for our work in Richmond, I thought I'd really quick just touch base with people who are wondering where we are. It is Sunday night, February 28th, and the General Assembly just adjourned yesterday. So our rapid 6-week session is now done. And that means that we are heading into a 6-week gap before what we call the reconvene session. In the time in between, we get a chance to take some downtime and review all the legislation that the House and Senate agreed on, and it's sent to the governor's desk. And we will be reviewing that along with the governor. And when we get back together in 6 weeks, the governor will send back some recommendations for us about his take on some of what we passed and some of those refinements. So if you're tuning in tonight, especially interested about some of what is in the news, please know that we are too, and about that work that we'll be carrying together as we review these things. But before we get deeper into that and all of that exciting work, let me start by giving Andria a chance to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about how she came to public service.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I find you just have this perspective on policy that is it's refreshing. And I'm excited for the conversation. So for those of you who may not know me, I am zooming in from Norfolk, Virginia. I was raised in the Hampton Roads area. My family moved here to Virginia Beach when I was about 7. Unfortunately, a few years after that time, my dad left my mom, and my mom had never worked outside of the home at that point. And I tell this story because it's relevant to some of the things that I want to work on, because it's part of my DNA and my background. My mom had never gone to college. She was one of 8 kids. And so she went back to our local community college and took some classes and became a technical illustrator or a draftsman, and was able to make ends meet for my brother and me. And as a result of that experience, and as I look around in this COVID economy of so many people who, whether the hospitality industry or others, that need to be retrained or upskilled, I think we need to really focus in on our community colleges, our trade schools, apprenticeship programs, et cetera, so that more folks have that opportunity to gain a skill and a career. I went on to the University of Virginia, as referenced. I have a degree in Asian studies, so I studied Japanese and business and history, and economics, I should say. I have an economics minor, and then went on to work in corporate America after UVA in industrial sales and marketing. I had the very exciting job of selling plastics throughout the Northeast. And I'm now the anti-plastic person. So we could talk about polystyrene all you want. I actually know quite a bit about it, and injection molding and blow molding and extrusion film, et cetera. So I did that for the first part of my career before attending the Wharton Management Program, which was a 2-year part-time program that I went through while working full-time, and then left corporate America, and I ran 2 small startup companies. In that, I ran one in LA that made CD and DVD packaging. And then I ran a tech company that I started in 1999 in Northern Virginia, a .com, as we called them back then, with the thought that I was going to become the next .com billionaire. I was created websites and communication tools for cities, towns, and counties We had $1 million in seed funding, and we had 22 employees at our height. And then in 2000, I can't believe it's 21 years ago, the tech bubble burst. And like many other companies, I ran out of runway because the venture capital funds stopped funding, and I had to lay off 22 employees and declare corporate bankruptcy. Not something I'm particularly proud of, very humbling, but it is an experience that I carry with me now as I look at so many companies, small firms that are struggling to stay open. And to have that empathy and understanding of what that's like as Lieutenant Governor, to be able to really lean in on ensuring that we have access to capital for small businesses, that we, as from our procurement standpoint, that we are ensuring that we are providing opportunities for SWAM, small women and minority-owned businesses. It's really important and something that I understand on a personal level. I still stay very involved in the business community. I'm on the boards of 757 Angels and our local accelerator. And we could talk about tech and innovation, Sally. I know that's something that you and I share in common. And Virginia is has a lot of opportunity for improvement there, for sure, at the state level. From that time, I came back to the Tidewater area. I helped with my husband raise our 3 boys, who are now 22, 19, and 16. I've been very involved in a lot of local nonprofits, helping families who are experiencing homelessness, victims of domestic violence. And one of my favorites is a social venture that I helped to start that helped people who'd recently been incarcerated, reentry program and workforce development. And then I got involved in politics again in 2008 when I became a precinct captain for my local Norfolk City Democratic Committee. And I've been involved in local, state, and federal politics since then. And fast forward to almost to today, in 2016, I decided to run against a 16-year incumbent for the city council seat that I now hold. And at the time, and Sally, you may appreciate this, I was told to wait my turn. I was told that there was no way I would win. I wouldn't raise enough money. This isn't how it's done. And I was determined, I persisted, and I beat him in 19 of 23 precincts. And now I represent about 125,000 Virginians in my role on the Norfolk City Council. I could tell you a lot more of the things that I'm doing now. I'm focused on regional transit, affordable housing, the environment, flooding, broadband access. I would love to talk more about that as well. But those are just some of the things that I'm doing right now. And I love this job. And I've gotten to see quite a bit of Hampton Roads area, but I think the skills are very transferable for the rest of the Commonwealth. And I'm excited to bring 30 years of experience in the private sector, the nonprofit arena, the environment, and the public sector to bear as the next Lieutenant Governor.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I hope that the folks who are watching can understand why Andria and I have found ourselves enjoying get to know each other as we've had a chance. I think we both share a real love for entrepreneurship and for innovation, for executing on the details, because we know none of it really gets done unless you get those pieces right. And then also for understanding what it's like being a woman in politics who was not invited. But it had some determination and some work that we wanted to see done, and decided to trudge ahead, and found that when we apply ourselves to the projects, just like we have to do the other hats that we wear, that we can get that good work done and bring a lot of people together around some really exciting work. You said a little bit about what you've done in your service on the Norfolk City Council, and would love to give you a chance to talk more. What are some of the accomplishments that you're most excited about in the time that you've been in public service?
Oh my goodness, there are a variety. You'll appreciate this, Sally. So one of the first things I did was really stress transparency and access. So we stood up our open data portal. We also created and it became part of something called STIR, which is a startup and residence program, where we invite entrepreneurs to come in to the sort of civic lab, if you will, of a local government and to help solve our problems with new technologies. I wrote the first climate action plan for our region. I helped to get CPACE passed, which is a financing tool in our toolkit that helps developers implement renewable energy efficiency, and resilience in stormwater projects. I have been very active at a regional level. I chair this Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. And what that is essentially the 17 municipalities of our region, which represents 1.7 million people, the elected officials and our chief administrative officers. It's a bit of a microcosm of the Commonwealth. So we have very rural counties, we have very urban cities, and we have very suburban areas. And we've got Republicans and we've got Democrats. And we've been able to come together on issues such as supporting offshore wind and the opportunity that presents for Virginia as a clean, renewable energy source, as well as amazing opportunity for jobs. Addressing flooding, which I know people think of that as only a coastal Virginia issue, but I think it's an issue in Nelson County and Roanoke and Danville and Alexandria and Chesterfield. And that's something I've been very passionate about. I was on the Planning Commission for 3 years before I came onto council. And so I started in that capacity. And we actually adopted right after I came onto council, the most resilient zoning code in the country, with a little pushback from our builders because they didn't want to spend any more money. But it was the right thing to do. And it's something I'm really proud of. Right now, I'm in the middle of a big transit redesign. I'm vice chair of our public transit authority. And we are, for the first time in 25 years, doing a complete blank slate redesign of our public transit in Norfolk, because we know that this is an issue of economic development. It's people's livelihoods. It helps with the environment. We're creating more frequent, more reliable service there. And then I would say civic engagement. At the end of the day, that's something I started early on into my council career. A few months in, I went to the Women's March in DC, like so many others probably watching. And I came home on a train, surrounded by people who are really, first of all, pissed off about Trump, and scared. And they were all very excited about doing something, but they didn't know where to start. And so, having been involved with lots of nonprofits and various causes, I thought, well, gosh, I need to do something. So in 3 weeks, with a band of grassroots volunteers, we put together something called Engage Norfolk, and we had over 1,000 people show up. Our theme was turn your passion into action. And we had all the local elected officials there, over 100 organizations where you could volunteer. We held civic workshops. And I've done that every year since, except for this year because of COVID. But I'd love to scale that. I'd love as Lieutenant Governor to be the Chief Engagement Officer, and really do a better job of leveraging the human capital that we have throughout the Commonwealth.
I think that that's a great segue, because Lieutenant Governor really is what you make of it. Its official duties are relatively limited in the role as the presiding officer of the Senate. If there's those tiebreaker votes, then you get to turn the tide. But beyond that, you can really be sort of chief of special projects and make the job and the platform what you want. And so it's exciting to hear people talk about their vision for the job, because it really is a special platform and so many different lenses that you can bring to it. I think in particular, you would be bringing a unique perspective among the other candidates for Lieutenant Governor as the only one with elected official experience at the local level. And you've already talked about so many of those core local issues like transit and like planning that undergird everything from confronting the climate crisis to affordable housing and workforce development, all of it. As you think about taking that step to a statewide office and serving in Richmond, what in particular do you think you would bring from that experience to the statewide work?
Well, I think having that connection, understanding how things translate from Richmond to Main Street and City Hall is often missing. And I think that would be really important. The last person to have that connection was Tim Kaine when he was elected Lieutenant Governor, having served at the city council level and then as mayor of Richmond. And just as most recently as this COVID vaccine rollout, for example, there were some missing pieces of the puzzle at the state level. And as a organization, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the 17 municipalities, we unanimously voted to send a letter to the governor saying, here's where things aren't going well, and here's how we can help at the local level. Because people don't often realize that the public health districts, while they reside in your municipality, they report to the state Virginia Department of Health. And there was unfortunately some a disconnect, whether it was technology, we could talk about that in terms of the registration, whether it's call centers, just feet on the ground, even at a local level, getting an MOU between our city, the city of Norfolk, and the state took about 8 weeks when we knew this was happening. And so I think bringing that perspective is something that I can, that will make me unique, to your point, and understanding how cities, counties, and towns work. It's important at the state level. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's definitely what I think is a differentiator for sure.
Well, I think especially in Virginia, because we have a pretty diffuse network of governance, we leave a lot to our localities when it comes to implementation. And I think often, at least that what I hear from our localities, that they wish the state were stepping up and doing more, not just when it comes to funding public resources, but also providing more guidance and infrastructure, whether that's physical infrastructure, or whether it's, support and guidelines. I think a lot of times we have a tendency to say, y'all figure it out. And so having people with that background, I think is really valuable, because you know what it means to figure it out when you find yourself in that situation. As you do look to Richmond, particularly the work that we're doing now, in this General Assembly session or in this new era in Virginia politics, what are the projects already underway that you see that are most exciting, that you would want to sink your teeth into as Lieutenant Governor?
Well, first of all, you sort of serve at the pleasure of the governor to some extent. You're the wingman to whomever he or she is. But if I could define my job responsibilities, I would love to make broadband access my number one priority. I just think it is our connection to the future, and I think we need a moonshot. I think Virginia needs to strive to be the most connected state in the country. I've been working on this locally for about 3.5 years. I forgot to mention that through this regional planning district commission, we stood up our regional broadband ring. And essentially what that is we've taken 5 cities. We are investing our infrastructure dollars to create a 110-mile ring that will be our municipally owned fiber that will connect to the subsea cables coming into Virginia Beach. We have the fastest internet speeds of anything on the East Coast coming into Virginia Beach, because originally for Facebook and for Microsoft and others. But we're going to connect this ring to those high-speed cables and create this new highway. And it's a middle mile, right? So we will hopefully create more competition, bring more ISPs, internet service providers, to the area, so that we can lower the costs for our residents and create higher speeds as well. As a result of doing this, we've stood up an authority. I'm now vice chair of the authority. I've learned a lot about broadband, and Virginia's doing a good job. We need to be doing a great job. We often talk, as we should, about our unserved rural areas, and we need to continue to do that. I think we also need to look at new technologies. We need to look at low Earth orbit satellite, the Elon Musk Starlink idea that's going on in Wise County. I'm a big fan of that. But we also need to be looking at our underserved areas. So I don't know what the situation in Charlottesville is, Sally, but in Norfolk, 25% of our homes don't have access to high-speed internet. It exists. It's just not affordable. So we have to address both the unserved and the underserved. And we need to think of broadband as being ubiquitous, high-speed, reliable, and affordable. And so if I could just sink my teeth into that and convene the best and the brightest federal resources, the private sector, academia, philanthropy, I would really love to focus my time there for sure.
I think you're spot on about it being a dual urban rural challenge, because here in this district, I mean, I live not far from downtown Charlottesville, and we have communities or neighborhoods that are walkable from where I am that would be urban by any definition, and they're priced out of anything that's affordable. And so it's not meaningfully accessible to them. And then 15 minutes from my door, you're in area that's completely undeveloped and also untouched by broadband access. And so these people who live on blocks, blocks that look very different, are equally cut off from the resources of this otherwise very thriving IT hub of a town.
Yeah.
And if that's the situation here, there are so many other stretches of Virginia that are unconnected for all sorts of reasons of their own. And I think if there are projects that come out of this very strange year that we've lived through, I think that the necessity of connectivity has to be one of them. So it's very exciting to have people who would be prioritizing that work. I think we've had a chance to talk already about what you would bring in your role as a local official. Can you also talk about how you would bring that perspective to really serving all of Virginia? Because I think one of the things that we're really mindful of here in the Blue Ridge area, and especially on behalf of our friends and neighbors that are further west and south, is that sometimes the bulk of our elected officials come from the biggest cities, especially for Democrats. We've got this kind of urban crescent that really drives the bus in Democratic politics. And that can sometimes some of us feeling a little less connected to our elected leadership, or like we have representation. How would you approach being a governor or a lieutenant governor for all of Virginia, given the experience that you're coming from?
Well, as I referenced earlier, so chairing the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission includes helping to represent Surrey and Isle of Wight and Southampton County, which you all probably don't know about, but they're very rural, smaller counties that have a lot of similar attributes to Southwest Virginia. So I have that experience. I think that connectivity with broadband really is so important to that sort of urban rural area. And I think focusing on that. We live in a very distributed work environment now. People are working from home, but you can't work from home, or you can't go back to the county where you grew up if you don't have connectivity. So that to me is a great way to start. I think also people just want jobs. They want good paying jobs, and they need to have the training to get them to that point. So workforce development and the experience that I've had with my own family, I think is going to be important, and be able to understand that. People just want to provide for their families. They want affordable, safe housing. They want good schools. And let me tell you, in Norfolk, Virginia, my kid's high school is over 100 years old. It's got mold. The ceiling fell in 5 years ago in the auditorium. I mean, we have a lot of issues similar to a lot of rural counties where the schools need to be, funded. Also, our teachers are underpaid. I'm really happy, by the way, of the 5% raise for our teachers and our state employees. Great job. So I think that there are a lot of experiences that I have personally that relate very similarly to our rural communities. But I'm looking forward to, driving all over the place. Now I do have an electric vehicle, so I have to stop and charge occasionally, but that's okay. We're going to work on making sure that infrastructure is improved in Virginia too.
Absolutely. I would love to take some time and dive in on each of those things, because I think that you hit some topics that I know are very important to voters and to both of us personally, from community colleges to K-12 to our climate transition. Maybe we'll start with our younger learners and talk a little bit about what you would like to see us doing in Richmond to support our schools. You did mention, for example, that the new budget includes a 5% raise for teachers, and I'm so glad that we were able to do that. At the same time, I think we know that it's work that's long overdue, that Virginia going into this year had the least competitive teacher salaries in the country. What's the average teacher salary look like relative to cost of living? We have pretty low teacher salaries here and a pretty expensive state to live. And that means that puts us bottom of the barrel when it comes to having our teachers keep up with what they could be learning in other professions with their very serious skills. And so that means that we've got a lot of work to do. We took some steps in that direction in raising teacher salaries this year, but I know that there's a lot left on the to-do list. As you would think about going into the year ahead, where would you be pushing us with our public schools?
Well, I know there's, I mentioned the structures, right? And I do think that's important, but I would always prioritize supporting our teachers and our faculty before we talk about the actual building. That's where it starts. And so continuing to make sure that classroom size, in terms of continuing education, making sure that our teachers have the resources. So for example, I don't know that we've done enough to provide the professional development to teach in this atmosphere that we are in right now, right? What's happening there, and how are we getting ourselves there? I think that's going to be really, really important. As we think about the jobs of the future and certification programs, CTE schools, more dual enrollment with our community colleges. I think it's difficult to hire faculty who might be who have knowledge of these next generation jobs, and then pay them the wages that we have to offer them. How do you find teachers who can do that? So I think we need to really look at what the pay scale is there as well. And I'm not a professional educator. I just know from my own experience with my 3 boys. I was very excited for them to take technology classes, and then realized that my kids oftentimes knew more than their teachers about technology, because we just couldn't provide the pay scale to attract the best and the brightest. So that's very important. Also, we talked about K-12. I think preschool is really, really important as well. And I think we need to look at early childhood education. I think early childhood education and childcare. I mean, childcare is a huge problem right now. And we've got to address that, and we've got to have good quality childcare. I think we're making some strides there. I benefited from that myself. Growing up, I was fortunate to be in a preschool education and ended up skipping kindergarten as a result. So I was always the dorky girl, is a year younger than everybody through high school. But I think early childhood education is huge too. That I'd love to focus on that for sure.
Well, I know you said you're not a professional educator, but I think that your instincts align very well with mine, both in my experience in my job, but also so many colleagues at the community college level here with our Piedmont PVCC in Charlottesville. The majority of our instructors at our community colleges are adjuncts, and they're getting paid in these few credit hours at a time, with, as you said, wages that are nowhere near competitive, particularly for people with technical skills in another profession, and with paltry benefits as well. That doesn't make it a really sustainable job opportunity. And it makes it really hard to say, hey, would you come teach these students these 21st century skills, but get paid far less than they will upon graduating at 20 years old. I think, as we know, I think both of us believe workforce and the teams that make companies and all good projects go are at the heart of all of it. So supporting those professionals is absolutely key, especially in our community colleges where our turnover rates are really high. I mean, we're not graduating a lot of our students because they're getting there and not finding the support that they need. I think we kind of ran the gamut there with a wide range of things. Can you talk a little more, especially because you do have experience running businesses? What can we be doing on the industry side to make sure that we are training students in the jobs that are in high demand, and then in promoting job growth among our entrepreneurs and our growing small and mid-sized businesses to make sure that there is demand for all of those workers as well?
So, I think of workforce as the technology, or I'm sorry, the talent pipeline. And I think we need to look at it from a talent perspective. I was really pleased, by the way, to have the creation of Secretary of Labor position. Good job. Because I think that we need to look at that. We need to be better aligning our workforce development with those jobs that are needed. And oftentimes we're not able to move as quickly as we can on that. I think in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, the other thing that I would say is, so oftentimes from an economic development standpoint, we go what's called whale hunting. We're looking for the next Amazon, and that's great when you can get them, although there's some issues with that too. But I think focusing on small businesses and really cultivating that and growing them from the ground up is something I'd like to do. It's not just about giving folks access to capital. You can't just write somebody a check and then be done with them. You also need to have wraparound services. You need to have opportunities to provide procurement opportunities. And Lord knows, so I chaired the Small Business Advisory Board when Warner was governor. So it was a long time ago, 2004, 2005. At that time, we were talking about SWAM goals that haven't been met. And so we're still talking about it. And so again, that's some other legislation that's great. But, we've got to really dig into that and make sure that we're providing opportunities for our minority-owned businesses, for women and veteran-owned businesses too. I think, I'm looking at some other examples of what's being done. I think at Morehouse College, where they're really leaning into providing entrepreneurship skills, funding, mentorship to our historically Black colleges. We need to work with our HBCUs in Virginia to continue to provide those opportunities too.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful when you have public servants who have worked at the nexus of so many different industries and organizations, because we do, you have had a chance to see how they all fit together and all of these different overlapping educational opportunities, because they really do all fit. You touched on something that I would love to go back to, because I know it's so deeply important to the community here in Charlottesville. And that is confronting climate change. And we talked about some of it from the perspective of transit and development and planning, which of course is work that that communities have to do one way or another. But I think that you in particular have learned a lot about how to do it in a way that prioritizes protecting our environment and preparing in a realistic way for the climate mitigation that we're all really going to need to address if anybody's being really serious and realistic about that.
Right.
Can we go a little deeper on that? And could you tell us more about what you've learned and where that might sort of light a way for more communities to follow suit?
Well, in Virginia, last year, the Virginia Clean Economy Act was a great first step and a huge first step and in the right direction. And so addressing climate change mitigation is where a lot of the discussion is, and as it should be. But I think we need to pair it with climate change adaptation, which is to suggest that climate change is here now, and we have to start adapting. So Norfolk has the largest naval base in the world in our borders. We have one of the second busiest ports on the East Coast, and we are second only to New Orleans in terms of flood risk. So we have identified $2.5 billion of infrastructure that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later so that we can get 40 to 50,000 sailors on and off a naval base, and we can get trucks on and off the port so that we can provide goods to Central Virginia. And so I don't think we've done nearly enough as a state to start to address adaptation. Thank goodness to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, that we joined, and that's going to provide about $45 million a year to start to address coastal flooding projects. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you, Sally, my one project in my neighborhood that needs to be done right now so that the road that I drive to City Hall many times a month, I should say, when it's sunny is flooded because of sea level rise. That one project is $50 million. So we've allotted $45 million statewide to this. We have got to get serious about that for sure. But, going back to the carbon, reducing our carbon footprint, the fact that we now are going to have a mandated regional greenhouse gas greenhouse gas inventory is huge because it's very costly for each of our municipalities to do that. So the state's going to do that. That's great. So that we can start to measure. I mean, based on your background, data is important, and you've got to you got to measure and have a baseline before you can adjust to it. But I think energy burden is an area that I would really love to focus on. Becoming more energy efficient is great because we're reducing our carbon footprint. But for our low and moderate income neighborhoods and communities where energy burden is a huge portion, how much they pay every month for their utilities, if we can help to reduce that too, it's a win-win situation. So I'm really excited about some of the energy efficiency elements that are happening there. Of course, I'm all about the electric vehicles and the electrification of our fleets and creating more of a focus there. And to the extent that we can continue to get more clean, renewable energy is great. And then also start to address energy storage, which I know is another passion of yours too. I always told my boys growing up, I said, anybody who can come up with a real battery to deal with how you actually harness renewable energy, that's the game changer. So none of them have followed my direction, unfortunately, but.
Well, I know that we've got a lot of great folks working on that because you're absolutely right. That's what I hear from everyone, especially a lot of the clean energy firms right here in Charlottesville, which is that the storage game is everything. Mm-hmm. I would love to talk in particular about the important point that you just raised about energy burden, because that's something that I had a chance to work on in the General Assembly this year. There were a lot of us in the House who were trying to bring legislation to help us change the way that we price energy in Virginia, because we know that right now we are really paying sky high energy bills, that Virginians pay the 6th highest energy bills in the country. And the House has sort of come around on that. We've looked at the data and we understand just how that burden is. And that a lot of it has to do from the fact that we have not been empowering our state regulators at the State Corporation Commission to adjust our energy prices, to bring them down as energy has actually gotten less expensive to produce, that the cost of renewables and a lot of other production technologies has really plummeted in the last decade, but Virginians haven't enjoyed those discounts. And right now the bottleneck is down the hall with our colleagues in the Senate. That while those bills got a lot of good support from the Attorney General's office and all of these environmental and economic equity advocates and came out of the House with bipartisan support, we got to the Senate and they were dead on arrival. And there seems to be a culture change there to first embrace the data that we've seen that says, hey, Virginia's got a problem, but also to break with the pricing structures of the past that have really empowered a handful of big utility providers at the expense of more distributed energy, kind of like you were describing. I think as Lieutenant Governor, you could have a really powerful role to play in that body, because you would be getting to cast those deciding votes on some of those issues where it's really tight right now. Can you talk about how you might help contribute to the culture gridlock, or maybe a culture shift inside of that body around some of these sort of big business, small business issues?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Hopefully I'm not having to take too many, cast too many ballots or tiebreakers, but it's a very real possibility. I mean, it's a very slim margin right now. And if something should happen to one of our legislators, it could become very, very important. I would do what I've always done, is bring people to the table and try and figure out the path forward. I don't know why there is such a difference in culture between the two houses. It's been interesting to watch from an outsider's perspective. And I would basically utilize the skills that I have from working with the Planning District Commission. That's, those 17 municipalities. There are a lot of differences of opinion. So I think that we absolutely need to be addressing how we price our energy. And I think the SEC and others, they need to be given more power. So yeah, I don't have the magic bullet, so I'm sorry for that, but I think it's just a leadership issue, is trying to bring people to the table and trying to create some sort of, sometimes it's compromise. And I know we don't like to talk about compromise. It's got a bad taste in the mouth for some people, but that's how we get things done at the local level, to be honest with you. It's not really particularly partisan at the local level either. You just got to act for your constituents. When I see somebody at the grocery store or the parking lot at my kid's school, they don't really care what party label I have on when we're talking about the flooding, to be honest with you. They just want to get it fixed. So anyway, I don't know. It'd be a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think it is always great to talk with people who have local public service in that way, because I do think a lot of local issues can cut across party lines in a way that can restore some of our faith in collective governance and in that kind of collaboration. It is also the case that at the state level, we are in many ways more deeply divided than we have been in a long time. And especially as you look at the partisan divides between Democrats and Republicans, is looking into what would be a general election campaign. It does feel like folks are just miles apart, that the kind of work that we have been championing in Richmond to expand democracy, to make it easier for people to be civically engaged, like you said, to expand civil rights and human rights to all of the many people who call Virginia home. There really do seem to be these big culture wars about who we are and what it means to embrace everybody. As you think about going out onto the campaign trail into some of those more partisan divide spaces, those kind of classic culture wars that are really so heated and tense right now, how do you think about talking to the people who live in the next door districts to mine, which are bright red? And we have a Republican congressman here, and so while I happen to serve in a pretty progressive seat, you don't have to go very far from where we live to find people who feel very, very differently. How would you think about trying to reach out to those voters and to talk about where we are in Virginia?
So my campaign video talks about Virginia wins by addition and not by subtraction or division. So it's talking about, in the sort of the Venn diagram of our lives, what's the piece of the puzzle in the middle, and focusing on those issues versus perhaps focusing on the outer edges. And so things like broadband access, workforce development, flooding mitigation, civic engagement, transit, public, affordable housing. I don't think any of those are particularly partisan in nature. So I've been able to engage a lot of different perspectives there. So those are the things that I'll continue to focus on. At the same time, I am the co-chair of our Social Equity and Economic Opportunity Commission here. So we are looking at food insecurity, and we're looking at the redlining that's happened for many years that has negatively affected Norfolk's citizens of color. And how do we start to address those issues in a better way? So I have that background, but I think when you go into those communities that you're referencing, I think you focus on those issues that we can all possibly we might not agree on, but at least we can have a civil conversation about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would love to give you a chance to talk about I know there are so many priorities of yours, but if there are particular things that we haven't touched on yet, would love to talk about them. Any major cornerstones of your platform that we haven't had a chance to give you a chance to share your perspective?
Well, you've been pretty thorough with me so far, so I appreciate that. I mean, I think I've covered most of them. I mean, the overall theme is to ensure access to opportunity for all Virginians. And again, I just think that's, people want to have access. They want to have a seat at the table. My background is such where we had some struggles in my family, not as many as a lot of people, but certainly now I live an incredible life, and I'm very blessed. And so for me, it's the opportunity to give those blessings back to others and bring more people to the table, to the room, where we can have that opportunity to do more for more people. I mean, I think the culture wars, I think a lot of the divisions that we have are just that people haven't been able to find jobs to make ends meet. I mean, I thought a lot of it's economics at the end of the day. And that's, if we can get back to that, I think that's really, really critical. But at the same time, addressing some of the division, addressing the criminal justice reform that is so needed. And you all have done such a great job in the special sessions and this time as well. We haven't even touched on marijuana legalization, but happy to have that discussion, because I think that's going to be, you got you move in the right direction, sort of.
Yeah.
But not really. So
yeah, maybe I could pause really quick and just kind of give folks an outline of what did pass and what didn't, and then invite you to kind of share where you think we're at, because I think that there's a lot of rightful confusion about what came out of Richmond last night. Let me sort of start with sort of big picture framing. I think that probably most folks who are tuning in now have heard me talk about this in the past, but when it comes to cannabis reform in Virginia, we have sort of three separate problems. One of which is, how do we deal with all of the harm of the past, and trying to do as best we can to right wrongs from the war on drugs of the many decades up till now. And then we have to talk about reforming our criminal legal system in the present so that we don't perpetuate that ongoing harm through criminalizing cannabis use. And then there's the project for the future, which is, how do we build a new system, a new set of markets and regulations around recreational and medical cannabis use. And if we think of those three big buckets, then I would say that what we've managed to pass in the last week in Richmond had the most progress on the first, that we took enormous strides forward on expunging past drug convictions, in sealing those records so that people who have prior drug convictions will have the opportunity to leave that behind with a clean slate and open all of the doors to housing and employment and credit that have for so long been unjustly closed to them. And I would consider that to be the biggest win of the progress that we made this session. And if we think about the last one, about building the system for the future, I think we started to put train tracks down for what the timeline would look like for legalization. But I want to be really honest that what we were able to pass this session is a very long runway for that process, that recreational cannabis would not be available for sale in Virginia until 2024. So 3 years out. And that's a long way away. And we can talk about why that pathway is so long. And then the piece in the middle is the one where I think we made the least progress, and there is still rightly a lot of tension, because there are a lot of people, and I would include myself in this bunch, that wanted to tie stopping the ongoing conviction and penalties for cannabis use almost immediately, because if we recognize that there was harm in the past, why would we perpetuate it? And what we managed to do instead was to align the onset a lot of those ongoing criminal penalties rather with the start of the recreational use. And so I think there's this big tension right now, and it's one of those things that we will be actively discussing and debating in the run-up to our reconvene session, is, can we get more folks on board with pulling the start date for that criminal justice reform up so that we can stop perpetuating that harm now that given that we know how important that is, and let the economics play out and that regulation more slowly. But that's sort of a framework for what we did. Would love to hear your reflections on that, Andrea. What, how you feel about that package. I've sort of shared my quick take, but what would you like to see us be doing as we continue that work in the days ahead?
Yeah, so I'm not as expert as you are, but I've been watching it and reading up on it and talking with folks locally. A young man who's about 30 who is African American, and he wants to become a retailer. Like, this is what he really wants to do, and he's saying, like, I don't want to be pushed out and pushed aside by big, pharma. I want to have an opportunity. So the whole social equity piece, I think, is really, really critical. We also talked about how he shared with me some of the concerns about increasing the charges for folks who are under 21. And sort of that criminality piece is a real concern of his. And I share that too. I agree. I mean, if we were going to go to legalization of recreational use, I think that should have happened now, and that we could have figured out that piece of the retail side, et cetera. I don't think, for example, the ABC the ABC commission should not be overseen. I think it should be a separate commission. I do worry that we are getting too greedy and we might tax it too high ultimately. And when you tax it too high, you're basically just perpetuating a black market. So we've got to be very careful about that too. So I know that we want to study this more, but I was under the impression that we'd had a big study. So I'm a little confused. I wasn't in there, so there's probably more that I don't understand, but I'm confused that the outcome was where it was. I mean, it like you say, there is some move forward, but somewhere or another, it's got shut down, and I don't know why. So yes, I think you and I have we're on the same page in terms of support and where things need to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we just to also give people a timeline of where we've been. Last July, we did what's called decriminalizing cannabis, which means we moved the penalty from potential jail time to being a civil penalty. So now if a police officer stops you for possessing marijuana, it's more like a traffic ticket. It's a $25 fine. But we know from the data that we've already seen come in since that July 1st start date of decriminalization that the racial disparities persist. That Black Virginians have been 4 times as likely to be stopped. Now, fortunately, here in Charlottesville, we have not been issuing cannabis citations at all for simple. So we're sort of already living in the what if simple possession were legal state here. And it's not like we've seen dire consequences. We said, hey, we understand that there is racially disparate policing around simple possession of marijuana. So let's stop issuing those citations. And then let's talk about how do we build up the framework, like you said, for those social equity licenses. And I think that does take some regulatory work to build that framework, because the goal is to create space and to protect space for exactly the kind of entrepreneurs and small outfits that you were describing. Because if we were to just say on July 1st, throw open the doors and anyone can rush into Virginia and start a new outfit, then we would see the people who are most prepared, which are the big corporations that are already up and running in other states, be the first people who are able to set up shop. And it would be really hard after the fact to create space for those smaller ventures. So I understand why it's going to take some time. I understand why we probably won't get there by July with all else that our state is handling right now in the COVID recovery. But 3 years, I think, is more than we would need to set up that framework. And so that's, I think, where a lot of us are going to be pushing, is to say, in the meantime, let's stop issuing those civil penalties, because we know they're not working. We know that doesn't really deter drug use. We know it sure as heck doesn't deter substance abuse or addiction or help anybody who has different challenges with their substance use. And then let's get on our giddy up and start getting that regulatory framework into place, because 3 years, I think, is longer than we need, given all the good research that has been done.
I'm gonna use that. Get on your giddy up. What was that?
Get on your giddy up. Yeah, that's just how you can tell maybe I'm not from Virginia originally. But I would love to ask you a couple questions that have come in here from the people who are watching, that are really more sort of big picture as you think about the role of a lieutenant governor. Because it is sort of a strange job. I think a lot of folks don't quite understand how it's structured. like the legislature, it is officially a part-time job with a lot of full-time year-round duties. Can you talk about, just sort of educate folks about the structure of the job? How do you serve? How much do you get paid? Someone was asking here, and how you imagine doing that with the many other hats that you wear, and splitting your time, kind of nuts and bolts. What would it be like to be LG?
Yeah, so I think you get paid $33,000 a year. I think I believe that's the amount. You have statutorily in the code, you're supposed to have board positions on, I think there's 8 or 9 boards, including the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, or the Virginia Tourism Authority, both of which I think in the Virginia Military Commission. Those are all things that I bring to the table already in terms of economic development. Tourism, of course, in the Hampton Roads area, that's a huge piece of the puzzle for us. And I think, tourism is an industry that's gotten hit so hard because of COVID, and that we've got to really help folks come out of this. And I think tourism, ecotourism, and the opportunity for tourism for small towns is really exciting for me. I'd love to continue to focus on that. Of course, supporting the military. We have the largest concentration of military and federal assets here in the Hampton Roads area. So that's an important piece of the puzzle for me. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Elaine Loria, Congresswoman here, who's a 20-year Navy veteran, as well as several military veterans from the area. So basically, the answer is I would resign my position on council and all the things that I'm doing here locally. And I would, I'm very lucky to be able to do this full time, and I would want to do it full time because I want to get something done. I don't want to just be lieutenant governor and I gavel in and I gavel out and I break some ties. I want to get stuff done. And I want people to realize that, that she's taken this on in a big way. I mean, that was what I did on city council. It's a part-time job here too. But I have just leaned in, and I tried to be as accessible as possible, be everywhere I can be, and to actually get some real work done. And I'm proud of not only telling you, Sally, what I'm going to do, but I can tell you what I have done. And that's the role that I would want to take as lieutenant governor. You have a small staff. You look at the history of lieutenant governors. Some people have taken on different roles. It's whatever their passion projects are, and it depends on whatever the governor is, whomever the governor is. And quite honestly, God forbid, I mean, we could have a Republican governor and a Democratic lieutenant governor. That has happened in the past, or vice versa. So I think the candidate that is on that statewide ballot in November, of course, I'm completely biased in this crowded field of 8. We've got incredibly talented folks, but I think coming from Hampton Roads, bringing local government, bringing a business background, a planning background, an environmental background that I have, I think really makes me a strong candidate to win on a statewide ticket.
Ron here in the chat has a question that you are exactly the best person to answer. And it's a question that we have to talk about all the time in Charlottesville local government, because we are in a community that is always eager to try new things and to be innovative. And of course, as you know, in Virginia, that means that in local government, you always bump up against everyone's favorite default, which is the Dillon rule. And I feel like I'm constantly doing Civics 101 with constituents when they have a big idea about something that we should be doing at the local level. And then we have to talk about the Dillon rule. But I'm sure that Ron here knows it well, probably from lots of different angles, and would like to know how you feel about that, and whether it's something that we might do something about at the state level, or approach from a different lens.
So I call the Dillon rule the Mother May I rule. Right. It's as a locality, unless it's been expressly written, whether it's taxation or a law, for example, provided by the state, provided by our friends in the House of Delegates and the Senate, you can't implement something. So, for example, the city of Norfolk, if we wanted to ban single-use plastic bags, up until 2 years ago or a year ago, we couldn't do that because it wasn't expressly permitted by the General Assembly. There are a lot of challenges with that. And as a local government official elected, I would say that I would like to see some sort of compromise where we don't go completely to home rule, which is sort of the opposite side of things, but that there are certain sections where we could carve out where there's more authority given at the local level. There are reasons why to have some state continuity, especially if your business is working from one one city to the next, that there's some sort of continuity around them. But at the end of the day, the only person who can change the Dillon rule are the people who want to stay in power, the General Assembly. So do you have any ideas how it would change, Sally? What's your perspective?
It's interesting that you bring it up. It's one of those things where there's also a big culture gap between the House and Senate. Delegate Corey, who is the chair of the City Councils and Towns Committee, this is a passion project of hers, and one that I think she wants to take up in the coming year, and has been part of some really wonderful conferences with the folks at UVA Law. We have some excellent local government experts here on the faculty. Those of you who are watching from the Charlottesville area may know Rich Schreger in particular, who's written extensively on the Dillon rule. And he has some ideas about exactly some of that gray area that we might be able to split between the poles of Dillon and home rule. Something that I think he calls the power of initiative, which is sort of one way of articulating how do you try new things if the code is simply silent. Like if the state code doesn't say anything about electric scooters because they didn't exist yet, right. How can a city council start to pilot something in that space before we create a section of state code that rightly doesn't exist? Because that is, especially when we have such a short General Assembly, it means that if you want to try something and you get the idea in April, then you have to sit there for 8 months and hope that you can convince the General Assembly in the long run to take it up. And so it really does put a drag on how local governments can function year round. So I think we may, Ron, have some progress on that to show in the next year, thanks to Delegate Corey's leadership. And she knows that I'm a big fan of trying to contribute to that work because it is such a priority for our community here. So we will be sure to keep you posted on that. I am mindful of the time and want to thank you for being so generous with yours. We have just a few minutes left. And so would love to give you an opportunity to talk about how folks who are excited about your candidacy can get involved with your campaign.
Sure. Thanks, Sally. I really appreciate it. This has been really fun. I could talk to you for definitely a couple more hours. We didn't even get into technology in terms of piloting and don't even get me started on the Virginia Employment Commission and VEC. I've been trying to register there for almost 2 months for my employees, and I can't get registered. I can't even imagine if you're trying to get unemployment claims. So I think you and I need to sit down and talk about technology in the state of Virginia. I think there's a lot of opportunities for improvement. Anyway, so my campaign, my campaign website is andriaforvirginia.com. And I don't know how to do this. Can I put it in the chat? Will people see it, or how do I?
I think they won't see it in the chat, but if you actually, if maybe my staff who are watching the live feed, that they can drop, they can pull that out of our chat and, oh, excellent. Looks like we've already got it there. So there are fine folks who are helping us out and getting you those links wherever you are.
So Tova, my campaign manager, I think she's already on top of it. She's much smarter than I am on all the stuff. So she's going to put some information in the chat. We're all trying to get our ballot petition signatures collected. And so there's an online great form. Talk about, can we just do this every time for statewide?
Please.
Let's just, and delegates. I mean, so typically we have to get in-person petition signatures, and we now have this new form, and it's the way to go. So I'm pleased about that. If people want to volunteer, volunteers are what make campaigns great. And we need grassroots volunteers. We need people who are interested in doing everything from making calls, sending text. At some point, we're going to get back out on the doors, whether or not it's door knocking. It might be lit drop because we want to be safe. And then unfortunately, the reality is we haven't had major campaign finance reform yet, so we still have to raise money to make these campaigns work so that we can get our name out and about in the field. So I would love if anybody would like to donate, or what I call invest in the campaign. We would love to have your support there for sure. And I'm excited about the opportunity. I really. I'm ready to hit the ground running. I think I bring the years of experience, the knowledge, and to some extent the network as well. That's going to be important to get things done in Virginia. So hope to bring on some supporters from tonight. And thank you, Sally, for doing this. You are you need to continue this. Like, this is another job for you. Yeah, the Oprah, but even better.
Well, I don't know about that. I will say that while we've been in the General Assembly, it has been like the closest thing that I've been able to do to being back in the classroom and just having a chance, because I often with my students like to do guest lectures and bring in people who can share their firsthand experience. And so now the session is wrapped, I'm excited to get back to my other gig of being a teacher. Unfortunately, we've been doing that remotely as well. I can't wait for the day that I can get back in a classroom. But wanted to thank you for taking the time. It has been such a pleasure to get to know you. And we'll so look forward to welcoming you back to Charlottesville someday. Is there anything else that you would like folks to know as we think about signing off tonight?
No, just everybody pay attention. 2021 is not going to be a cakewalk for Democrats. We've got to maintain our majority in the House, and we've got to reelect 3 statewide offices in the Democratic Party. So we need everybody's paying attention and supporting good candidates. So thanks for the opportunity, Sally.
I think that that's an excellent note to end on. It may sound a little bit wild, but we are now 100 days out from this primary in June. It is fast approaching, and it will be here faster than we know it. And while we are lucky to have lots of wonderful, talented, capable candidates on the ballot, I don't think that we should assume that any one of them is predestined for November. I think while anybody who's watching tonight is probably pretty proud of the work that we've been doing in the last 2 years, and I think that we should be. But there are just as many people in Virginia who feel like things have changed for the worse in the time since. And I think if you remember what it felt like for so many people to be awakened in that blue wave and the Women's March crew after Trump, there are people in Virginia right now feeling the same way. That they've lost control of their country with a Democrat in the White House and with a Democratic trifecta in Richmond, and they want to flip things back, and they will be excited and motivated to go out and support their candidates. And so we need to make sure that we are the same. So I'm excited to have candidates who are as committed and energetic about the campaign trail as Andria, who know what it's like to do that at a serious level. And I will look forward to seeing you out on the campaign trail very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sally.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will look forward to seeing you next week too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.